Was there signs that the first hype cycle would fail before it failed?
The difference I see, there was just a few people that could really understand the tech and use it, etc. While today, that barrier, that level has gone down and literally anybody can use it.
There's a universal jailbreak, I think, that just works for everything right now, and no one's patched it.
We can't even make GPT give the same answer twice.
AI councils were built quickly. The people there might not necessarily have an ML background there,
but then are now releasing and creating laws, rules, and ways at which your company or enterprise must use AI without having any understanding of what that means.
My S3 bucket, I don't know, open to the internet. That's not the right question to ask.
Performance was, and I will argue it still is, a bit of a challenge. When we started doing that work, there was no company that had those safeguards.
The power of AI is exactly not that, right?
There's no perfect solution, but how you mitigate it, how do you reduce the risk on those?
If you haven't building a security program on AI, then this is probably a conversation for you. Specifically, if you are in a world where you have ML, yes, the one before ChatGPT became popular, as well as you're building chatbots in the GenAI space. In this episode, we had the conversation with the CISO of Moveworks, Damian Hasse. In this episode, we spoke about some of the challenges that cybersecurity people face as they build programs or security around AI, how he approaches security in his organization for AI, and how he's encouraging his team to start using more AI as well. And then somewhere in the middle, we also got into the whole, I guess this is the fifth wave of AI. I did not know that. So we got into this tiny bit in the middle where we're trying to figure out, is this hype cycle that we are in today with AI, is it going to survive, or this is the end of it after another month or maybe 2 years? Let me know in the comments if you believe the hype will continue, or would this also fade away as all the other previous AI wave did? And as always, if you are here for a second or third time, I would really appreciate if you take a moment to drop us a review or rating on Apple or Spotify if that's where you're listening to this. But if you're watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn, definitely give us a subscribe and follow. It definitely helps us quite a bit. It takes only a few seconds, and I really appreciate your support in helping us grow this channel and be found by more people as well. And if you know someone who's working or wants to know about AI security, specifically in that world of ML and Gen AI working together, definitely share this episode with them. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace. Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI Security Podcast. I've got Damian with us today. Hey, Damian, thank you for coming on with us.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Damian, just to set things off, and set the scene, if you don't mind giving us a bit about your professional background, what are you doing out today? And I guess, what's your professional background? Let's get into that.
Sure. So I'm currently the CISO at Moveworks. I joined over 3.5 years ago, literally a year before GPT became a thing. So it's been a lot of fun being able to ride this wave. One of the core reasons why I joined, when I saw a demo of the product, being able to use ML AI to actually solve real problems, I was really excited. Before here, I was at Amazon for about 9 years, working on the security privacy for Amazon consumer devices and the services. I was there when Alexa, Echo, etc. were created. So it was a lot of fun seeing that, as well as Fire TV. When I was there were just 2 devices, the Kindle and the Fire tablets. So when I left, I lost track of the number of devices we had, but also worked for a bit on the Kuiper, which were the satellites that Amazon was putting. Before that, I was short period at VMware, also on security. And before that, I was at Microsoft for 12 years doing security before security was a thing. So I joined in 2000, and there was a transfer of the computing memory from Bill Gates in 2002, 2003. So anyways, so I've been doing security for quite some time, and awesome. Privacy as well. But anyways.
I was going to say, you have seen 2 transitions. I guess it's transition of security emerging and also AI ML before. These days, people just say AI willy-nilly and just assume that you're thinking of Gen AI. I'm curious as to, now that you've spent some time on both sides, the pre-GPT era and the GPT era that we're living today, in terms of how you're thinking about AI, how do you describe AI security before that and today, out of curiosity? Because I don't know how many people are just, do you say AI or do you say Gen AI? What do you say?
To be fair, I use a little bit of AI, Gen AI, LLMs, and ML. I mix and match for the most part. I should probably do better, but I just use them. But the way I see it, going back to your question, the pre-GPT era, I will argue it was more of an explanation and justification to explain people how ML work, how it can add value, focusing a lot more on NLP, NLU, natural language understanding, natural language processing, which is different from Gen AI when it can actually just generate stuff you were just trying to understand in the world before, or if you were doing with video, right? Trying to identify things from a video, which was also a complex problem to solve. And when I joined Moveworks, one of the key challenges was, I would say, explaining to people how the technology worked. But for the most part, it's like it was justifying that a bot could work, that there was tech that could solve problems. After that, it was more about education, heavy on how GenAI works, what are the security. One of the key things people confuse was about, hey, if I'm using a large language model, doesn't mean that it's been trained with the data. No, it just depends on what the company is doing with that data. But anyways, so that for me has been a heavy transition. Also, the one other thing that I will add, a lot of companies today now have AI councils or something to that extent or the equivalent. Some of them, I will argue, I think it's good. Others, maybe they're trying to do the right thing, but they still need some education or some ML expertise to help them make the right decisions. So,
what makes you say that? You sound more careful in your saying some have councils, some I'm not sure if they're good or not, but yeah, like just be direct. What's
I have insurance, but I don't really know if it works.
Clearly you have run into some issues. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen and why. What are the sort of mistakes that are happening there?
So from my perspective, a lot of companies like, okay, yeah, we need to embrace AI. But do they really understand what the technology is? Do they understand what's happening with the data? I will say some of the concepts are similar to what we have before, whether it's access control, who has the data, what are we doing with the data, access, etc. But at a meta point, these AI councils were built quickly. The people there might not necessarily have an ML background. They're trying to learn. So that's why I'm saying they might not. They're trying to. So I give them credit for that. But sometimes the questions being asked is, okay, let me just take a step back and explain to you how the technology works, right? So going to the basics. One example is people think all ML is generative AI, when in reality there's deterministic. The way you do search when you need to rank content, it's not necessarily a generative model. It's just trying to stack rank, give you scores like, okay, is this the right thing that matches your criteria, just to be able to serve back. Google has been doing that for over a decade.
There's a thing called machine learning before there was AI.
Exactly.
But is it the same though, Caleb? Tell me.
So Caleb, to be fair, I took an AI class back in the late 90s and I used Lisp, right, to write a program that ended up solving a puzzle. And that was called AI back in the day.
It was, yeah. AI has had its sort of peaks and valleys, right, in the history of AI. First, was it two? Maybe there's two peaks, but I feel like I know for sure there's one peak of AI is going to change the world, and it ended up going nowhere. And so it collapsed. Mm-hmm. And then we are now in our second iteration of AI going to change everything, with LLMs specifically being the new. And then it may have its collapse too, because actually, I think Satya just came out recently this past week saying things around how AI is not as big as what people think it's going to do. And there's some quote and some sort of like output now of him saying, hey, AI is not the change of which we had expected. Some people are saying this is just the fight between now OpenAI and Microsoft, but there's been some now executive sponsorship saying, oh, maybe this is not all the hype at which we think it's going to be.
Interesting.
Caleb, if you don't mind, what do you think? I'll tell you my take after, but just wondering, what do you think?
I like, Damian, how you just set me up to go and say what I think so that you can come. You're like sacrificial lamb, Caleb. You go first.
You go first, then I'll share.
Okay, fine. But I think, maybe, Damian, what you're also saying is I've also seen this similar where, hey, there is obviously this rush to adopt AI. Every CEO and every board member is saying you must do this, similar to cloud, similar to every other sort of, I think, big innovation. And then these AI councils got put together consisting of people who have no knowledge, background, or technical capability to understand AI, but then are now releasing and creating laws, rules, and ways at which your company or enterprise must use AI without having any understanding of what that means. And with someone who's more technical, who've maybe had some influence in both machine learning, historics, capability, and hey, you don't need these safety regulations for an algorithmic model that we've been using for 30 years. We don't need to apply that here. Or, hey, you're hoping these great things in AI are going to accomplish these things, but that's not how it works. That's not how AI works. And you need to have use cases for these things, not just say use it in some specific. Is that what you're saying? Is that a little bit around that?
Yeah, I agree. My question was more about your take on what the value and whether it's going to drop again.
Okay, yeah.
I think the way you phrase it, thank you, made much better than what I did. I agree. The argument that I have, the AI councils are trying to do the right thing, but they're learning as they're building those capabilities.
Right.
If I look holistic over the last 2 years, give or take, in the beginning, it was all over the place. People don't really understanding how LLMs work, what it could do, what it couldn't. Anyway, it's just basics. Today, I will say people have leveled up, which makes it easier to explain. Some of the questions they're asking are legitimate, which is good, right? We're having more interesting conversations. Doesn't mean that happens all the time. We have improved, I look at internally, our documentation to better explain, highlight the basics. So then we can have more interesting conversations. And usually when people understand, if we go back into some of the specifics, how do you handle hallucinations? How do you handle prompt injection, prompt leakage, right? Going into the access control aspect is, oh, okay, now I understand what you're doing, how the product works, how you mitigate those, right? There's no perfect solution around some of the stuff, right? But how you mitigate it, how do you reduce the risk on those areas?
Damian,
but I
you put it in
agree.
a much more optimistic way than I put it out.
But maybe what I'm seeing is because there's also no, I guess, there's no straight answer to a lot of questions as well in AI. I get the very foundational piece of if you have a legal team, if you have a marketing team, if you have sales team, product team, tech team, the council is a mix of different people with different agendas, all trying to either use it, but then at the same time, we can't even make GPT give the same answer twice. And because considering we're not at that stable foundation for AI, I think that's where a lot of the councils were struggling, where I've heard this a lot of times where if you have 35 people in the room, there's no one decision coming out of it for sure. Like there would always be a divide in voting system and whatever. At least that's how I saw it. And that's maybe my viewpoint on that challenge was that, because to your point, what Damian said, there's not enough knowledge in it. But then to what Caleb, you're saying, we're not looking at use cases. We're just going, we just need to use AI. Somehow just fix it, use it, just do something with it, I think.
So if I were to actually merge those together, this goes back to maybe the Satya comment and Damian's, hey, Caleb, you answer this. I want to hear your view. I'm going to merge all these together. And I'm going to say that I think that everyone is correct. And here's what I mean by that, which is obviously in any of these things, you're going to get you have the hype cycle, right? You're going to get way overhyped on what this thing can accomplish than what it legitimately probably ends up bringing. And the way you look at any of these is look at any of these cycles. Look at cloud. When you look at cloud, did it change everything in our industry drastically? Absolutely, it did, in amazing ways. Did it do it in the first 2 years? No, of course not. Everybody was lifting and shifting into cloud, right? They were copying what they knew of the world then and trying to replicate that world in this cloud. And we didn't really recognize the true transformational benefits of cloud until 7, 8 years plus later, when people started really building with re-architecting and building with the mindset of cloud and a different thought and strategy. And I think similar, like with AI, we have super high hopes, but it doesn't happen all in the first 2 years of what happens. And we're trying, and I think we're also doing this lifting and shift. How do we think about what we do today and replicate it in a machine? And so there's a lot of this same sort of copy, and there's this expectation level that says, oh, this is what it's going to be like, when in reality, that's not going to be like. And so when do we start seeing true transformations in this is 5, 6 years down the road, where we have adapted ourselves to think about it in the new way. Like, for example, we know that AI is fundamentally different every time, right? Like we get different results. And so we are looking at that today in this mindset of weakness because we look at things pragmatically. It needs to be like code. And therefore, it should be, I can consistently get consistency out of this. When in reality, the power of AI is exactly not that, right? It is the power of not being consistent. It is the power of human reasoning and thinking, quote unquote, to some extent. And so, like, I think that, in 5 or 6 years, maybe we accept it for what it is and maybe learn how to empower through that and use it in those manners. And so, do we have transformational change in it? Yeah, there's no question. Like, I think it's a given, it's going to come. But I also think we're struggling in trying to outfit the way we think it should be versus the way it is. And as soon as we start making that shift, like similar to cloud, we start rethinking the way we think in the way that it works best, I think you'll start seeing much more great shifts that occur from it. But again, going back to this AI council, I think we had high expectations and we're just saying we need to use AI with not really knowing what for or how.
Yeah, yes.
That creates a lot of problems, a lot of hype, a lot of overspend, a lot of used resources.
Hence, no decision made as well.
One thing I want to add, Caleb, to what you're saying, the distinction between cloud focus on, I would say, specific aspects of the business, who could actually do that transformation, who can make that happen. When I look at GPT, GenAI today, the reality is anybody can use it, can benefit, right? I personally have been pushing my team on each of the areas to focus, what can we do? How can we change how we are thinking? How can we look at problems differently? Talking to other people in the industry, some startups as well, right? That how can we make things better? There's a lot of, I would say, inefficiencies. I look at what is the mundane tasks that we as humans, quote unquote, are doing today that we don't want to do anymore, right? How can we be more effective? And from that perspective, that's how I see it. Okay, let's push the envelope, right? Some stuff will work. Some stuff, maybe the tech is not there today. We just need to wait a bit longer, right? But I see the benefit, the value. Personally use it on a day-to-day basis just to help me. Very simple. Sometimes just summarizing stuff. I need to just help. This is the idea that I have. Help me explain it better, right? This is the audience. How can I present the content better?
Actually,
very simple.
A great question for you, Damian, is when you think about how much you use AI personally, right, versus how much do you see it being used in your team or at your company that you've had to deal with? Where do you see those meters at, and what are good examples of both?
I think I'll be honest with you here, since we have dedicated ML teams, right? I will say experts there. We use it almost in any way we can. And for me, I'll give you maybe a specific example. One of the key things that we need to be mindful as we're adopting AI in general, right, is, okay, let's go explore, test, does it add value, etc. Once you see some value, it's okay, how can we measure that? What is the true ROI? If I look at coding is a good example, without going into some of the specifics, we ended up collecting stats to just have an understanding how useful are these coding GenAI tools. Does it really add value? Kind of some of the data that we gather, it seems like for more junior developers, it added value. For more seniors, not as much, which I'm like, okay, how would that change in the not so distant future? I think it will add value to more senior developers down the line, but at least for now, it's just helping level up those more junior developers. And if I look at personally within my team, being able to complete questionnaires, those security questionnaires that we all receive, and not really, GenAI helps a lot. We actually built those capabilities before GenAI, which wasn't as good, right? Because of some of the responses, just the language, the output. But with GenAI, it gives you that, what you describe, a bit of that logic. So the response makes more sense in the context of the question, right? Obviously, use the knowledge that we have. Also, we've been using it in the security operations aspects. In this case, not so much built in-house, but partnering with startups in the space to help us. So just trying to push the envelope where it makes sense and test things out and prototype POCs, etc. Okay. And then let's explore where we can go from there. But I think it's worth testing things out and see what works, maybe what doesn't.
I thought you might say you have an MCP server internally, but thank God you didn't say that.
But this is a good question. I was going to ask a little bit of like one thing that is clear where AI is making significant impacts is coding, right? It is in engineering. Whether it's at a junior level, Damian, to what you're saying versus senior level, that's just a matter of maturity and where these things go. But even let's just assume AI models are at their peak right now and don't go any further. The amount of value it's added just in engineering at a junior intermediate level is tremendous.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of discussion around this on, Damian, like how does this change security? Do you have any thoughts around from an engineering perspective, does this or does this not change the way you think about securing AppSec or ProdSec, or is it just the same stuff but a little bit different? Like how are you thinking about it?
I look at it, there's some similarities. So I look at it as a data type of like problem. The developing case, right? It's an IP issue, right? So it's my IP, right? The work that we do is not open source, so it's my own IP. So what are the questions that I have based on that? Number one, are they using whatever technology we are using, right, to generate code? Are they using the data for training? In essence, okay, what can happen if my IP is used to train the model and then somebody else ends it up with a quote unquote similar idea? Okay, yes or no, good to know. Okay, the other aspect is if they need to do any type of debugging or issue that we run into, etc. Okay, what access do they have, once again, to my data, in this case, my source code? If it's a SaaS solution, they're siphoning my code into their own quote unquote cloud, etc. I'm like, okay, good. Who has access? Thinking about from, once again, a data problem perspective, right? Who has access on their side? What are the right security controls? Can I ingest the content back into my SIM logs to just look if there's anything suspicious? The other aspect specific to source code, which is also, if I go back to the training, which I think is specific to AI, is how much would I trust this code? Could this code have malicious intent? Maybe it was poisoned, etc., right?
Yeah.
And it leads to quote unquote bad code, backdoors, etc. Or could it introduce a vulnerability, right? I'm like, okay. You can argue, how is that risk any different than if you're using, if a junior developer, you had a bad actor, an insider threat within your organization? Could you put similar controls in place? I look at the main distinction is the speed. You might have one insider risk, assuming you have one employee. Here you have X number of developers, so X number of the exposures that you might have. How do you truly scale that up? How do you look into those aspects? So that's how I've been looking at it. And also, as I'm thinking about the safeguards, they need to be a little bit different just than what the old world looked like, better, I'll say, being able to scale better.
One thing that I've worried about that I think is becoming more of a reality is prompt injection problems. Like the one thing that I feel, at least I'm going to claim this, I won't claim this worldwide, but let's just claim this in tech companies. 80% made up percentage number, by the way, of probably tech companies are using some sort of cursor, so-called AI engineering tool. MCP servers are becoming way more popular in all of these usages as well. And the fact now that there's so much open source being consumed in these things, and these AI engines we're tossing code into LLMs, they are going to be able to, we're going to start putting prompt injections in this stuff, right? Where we know if I'm an attacker, I'm just saying, if I'm going to wear the black hat and I want to target, and I go and I can put in malicious code, I can actually now put in malicious code and prompts that effectively know that they will run on an engineer's machine and it will go and execute these things. And there's nothing you can do about it. And there's nothing that detects this stuff in source code that cursor is running on. And so this is a whole area that I feel is just this black hole of blindness, it feels like.
Can I add two things, Caleb? You touch in my mind. I like to add a distinction. To me, what you just described is what the terminology I use is the indirect prompt injection attack. I think that's how you're what you're talking about, which is basically we're using an open source package, might actually have a prompt in there, right? And I don't know how it gets consumed, etc., and what the LLM might be doing compared to me as a developer trying to using Cursor Live and asking just a direct, quote unquote, from injection. I agree with you. That's a very interesting area and hard to solve. What I saw recently, what I read, quite honestly, was a very long paper that Anthropic put together to be able to look inside the model and understand how the decisions are being done and how it works on a jailbreak scenario as well as a bunch of other scenarios. This was a paper from March of this year, give or take. And I think it was great. We're still on the beginnings of that. But potentially, if we get that level of visibility, we might be able to make models better and maybe, crossing fingers, maybe prevent this in a more systemic manner if we understand how the models are operating under the covers, right, as they're making those decisions. Once again, it's just reflecting on my lessons from the paper that Anthropic put together recently. But I agree with you about the challenge that we have with what I say
it's an
indirect
interesting problem, though, because I guess maybe Caleb, you said this in a way just before. Are we looking at doing security in this new world with the old way that we know? I guess I'll use an example. Recently I was talking to one of the AI security companies, and they work in the cloud space, and I was just asking the question around, so am I asking the question, hey, is my S3 bucket, I don't know, open to the internet? And again, kind of like yourself, Damian, he came from the ML world, then now he's into the GPT world, and he's like, that's not the right question to ask. I'm like, what do you mean? That's the question that I'm concerned about. The question to ask is something wrong with my S3 bucket? And then let it come back to you with, hey, because it can come back with things that you would not even think about. And just because one thing's on the internet, just to say, hey, S3 bucket open to the internet is probably the worst thing that can happen, you're forgetting all the other 99 scenarios that could potentially happen that it would know of, but you just asked the wrong question. You got the answer you want, but it was like, you're going with the thing that you have been taught and trained to do. And I'm like, bringing it back over here. And I guess there are obviously a lot of unanswered questions in the AI space today.
I really like what you just said. And that's something that was a bit of a lesson for myself. And I can recall when I started to put things together. But one of the things, as I've been using GenAI, is literally what I haven't asked. What am I missing, right? As I'm going back and forth, brainstorming an idea or trying to put stuff together, I completely agree with you. And then you go back and then read what it spits out. More often than not, to be fair, I'm like, okay, yeah, you didn't add much value. But every now and then I get some nugget. I'm like, oh, I missed that. Good. Okay. So I agree with you. If you just ask that specific question versus what else should I be looking? What are my highest risk? Whatever else. I agree
what am
with
I
you.
missing? It's a great add to your prompt, right? Yeah, that is a great one.
Yeah, I was going to say, considering you guys, both of you touched on this earlier, that you guys saw the earlier version of the earlier hype cycle of AI, and now you're in the second or third cycle of AI. I did not see the first one. I'm curious, was there signs that the first hype cycle would fail before it failed? Or was it similar to what it feels today, where every company out there is, hey, I don't really care about use case, just start using AI?
I probably be more polite than Caleb, building a prototype on the primary example.
Only adults listening to this conversation. It's already failed anyways. We know it, we know what the ending is, so it's okay to talk about this.
But the difference I see is who could really use AI before and for what purposes and what was it trying to do. From my experience, when I interacted with bots in general in the past, it was really hard to get a useful type of response. It was just not there. And also, there was just a few people that could really understand the tech and use it, etc. While today, that barrier, that level has gone down, and literally anybody can use it. My daughter was using it. It's okay. She's 14, by the way. So my daughter was using it. I'm like, okay, that's great. She understands. I don't think she understands all of the issues necessarily, but I see that as the big distinction among the two worlds. That's my observation. Why that was a failure or not, I don't know, but just my interpretation.
And I think I was too young for that first phase actually of it. I don't know when that happened, but I believe I feel like it was like in the 80s or 90s, or maybe it was in the
80s.
80s or something like that.
Wow.
The first sort of AI hype, wasn't it? Like it was a while ago.
Okay, I was thinking like
I'm
in the
thinking,
last quote unquote decade, give or take, right?
oh yeah, hold on. Let me, you
Yeah,
know what
you're
I should
thinking
do
even
is
before.
ask AI.
Yeah, ask AI. When was the
Yeah.
last hype cycle?
When was the hype cycles of AI in our history?
While he's doing that, Damien, I agree with you. And we were having this conversation about this was the whole vibe coding conversation on how many people were rejecting the idea of vibe coding, and they said, "Hey, that's not the right way," or whatever. But everyone, to me, it was a reminder of that whole Apple BlackBerry moment where, going back to the cloud example as well, the reason cloud was slow in its adoption, where it took decades, because it was only accessible to enterprise, or you need to be able to pay that bill to be able to afford putting something in cloud. Whereas these days, there's a free subscription, $20 per month subscription. Like your daughter has it, everyone else's kids have it, my parents have it. They all, it's even if it's for generating funny images, it's available and accessible to every layer of the society, which is where it feels a lot more that it's going to be here for a long time. And whether what the stable state becomes is a question mark at this point in time. But the way, at least that's where it feels a lot more real to me. Where before this, I have to explain to people what
Oh,
cybersecurity is. Oh, did you find
I
it?
got to read this to you then. All
Oh
Okay,
right.
yeah, go for it. Go for
Here's
let's
it.
learn.
here's our history lesson.
Oh, like,
Here we go. The first wave, the birth of AI was 1950s to the 1970s. Researchers made bold predictions claiming in 1965 that machines will be capable within 20 years of doing any work a man can do, which is clearly failed.
sounds very similar.
Uh, the first AI winter came 1974 through 1980. Criticized AI's failure. Dramatic funding cuts of AI did not reach the hype. Second wave, 1980s. It's called the expert systems boom, when AI resurged because of expertise in very narrow domains. Companies rushed to adopt AI, with expert systems market reaching over $1 billion by 1985. Second AI winter, 1987 through 1993.
Oh wow.
High maintenance costs, brittleness of rule-based systems, collapse of Lisp, Damian, collapse of Lisp.
I use it.
The AI winter. And then the third wave, 1990s through the 2010s, when machine
By the
learning.
way, can I interject?
Yeah.
To be fair, when I use Lisp, for those of you not familiar, it's a recursive programming language, and the problem that it has that at some point the machine won't be able to handle anymore. So I'm not surprised that it
Right.
dies. It's just the
Yeah.
reality, recursion. Go
Oh
ahead,
yeah.
Taylor.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is the third wave. I think this is the wave that both Damian and I experienced, which is the machine learning renaissance. So this was 1990s through 2010s. Statistical approaches in machine learning, IBM's Deep Blue,
Yep.
vector machines and new algorithms, and practical applications in data mining and web research. And then now we are in the current wave, which is 2010s to present, which is the deep learning revolution. This is AlexNet, DeepMind, AlphaGo, and then the generative AI boom in 2022, being obviously our LLMs. Obviously, the breakthroughs, hype, disappointment, winter. Progress, next breakthrough. Repeat, wash, rinse, and repeat.
So the one that you guys experienced. So what? So was that your experience as well, Caleb? That it was just basically there were some specialized people who had knowledge about how to use it, and that's why was it called the expertise? Is that what you call it?
Yeah, I got deep into this when I was at Databricks, and even before Databricks, actually. And this was more, I started more experimenting around it because of the vision models and NLP models that kind of came out, right? NLP was the understanding of semantic reason, context around what was going on in sort of the language. And obviously the vision models, because of neural nets and deep learning, this was the breakthroughs during that time frame was, oh, I could get trained visual data sets and then create something out of that. For example, before LLMs existed, I created my own model that detected someone taking a photo of a screen, right?
Oh,
So I basically, and no, this is actually a really funny story. There's a task around, hey, if we have a secure iPad device, how do you prevent someone from taking a screenshot, taking out their photo or their camera and then just snapping a photo? And so I said this was a specialized device that was meant for very high security things. So I created a vision model by taking, get this, all of the photos I could of people taking selfies of themselves, taking a camera, taking a photo. And I created a neural net, a deep learning net that basically was a model that could detect when people were taking a photo of it. And I use that as a way of being able to say, yes, you can detect people by having the selfie front facing camera turned on. You can then detect when people are trying to snap photos of that screen. This was neural net. This was deep learning. This was the era of taking sort of trained data sets, creating a model out of it, and doing something useful. And you could do this as a single person, which was really the hype, the breakthrough, at least 7, 8 years, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
This was the thing that you could go do.
What was the compute for doing that? From my experience, the compute becomes expensive depending on
not at all. I was doing something really simple. I was just I basically took the equivalent of 150, 200 photos of selfies and I trained on it, which was not a lot of compute.
I see.
And the model at inference was not that big of a deal. As long as you got access to the stream, I used the model and it was able to detect when people would put a camera and basically take a photo, either a normal camera like this or a cell phone camera.
And fast forward to today,
and it wasn't, and that was really the cutting edge at the time, was being able to build this
so no RAG,
using
no MCP,
TensorFlow, right?
none of this, no RAG, no MCP, none of that.
No, none of this. Yeah, this was machine learning, right? This was building a neural network using TensorFlow, having a trained data set, building this algorithm, and then doing it. And this was obviously pre-LLM. And this was, a single person could build a notebook and go and do this. It wasn't that hard.
Was that failure because, to what Damian said, because there was a specialized set of people who could basically work with it and make something useful out of it? And probably to what you said, you had the mission, dedicate some time to go and find a model, find selfies, what would work and all of that. Yeah. It had to be specialized people. It wasn't available to, say, the general workforce.
You had to take time, you had to learn about it, you had to dig deep into it. It wasn't accessible in the sense that you had to go and figure out, how to use Jupyter notebooks, how to get the data, how to use TensorFlow, what's the right models to use. Like, you had to go and do all of this. And then even once you built a model, you got to find ways of putting it in production, right? Like, all of this stuff required both a lot of specialized knowledge, experience. You still had to be an engineer to know how to connect the model to the actual web app or the mobile app itself. Like, all of this stuff took a lot of time and effort to get together.
Interesting.
Yeah. The one thing for me to add, the way you described what I was focusing on compute earlier, was from my prior experience, and I didn't go in the direction you have been, Caleb, but when I was talking to you, the engineers, ML experts, when I was at Amazon back then, it was just the compute from needing to continue fine-tune and improve the model.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that's where things can get expensive.
And also, if you're working on mobile devices, I think AI models and compute are very expensive, right? Because you got limited battery life, limited compute capability. But this was the state of the art.
Back then, yes. Technically,
literally in 2020, right? That was the state of the art.
But this is still there, though. It's not gone away. Because to Damien, your point, and I guess people have been working as data analysts, ML people for some time, and companies have been doing this. And maybe bringing it back to the topic then, the whole security part of it, now that we've seen both sides, the ML side and the GenAI and GPT side, security look like today? And I guess you answered the question about how do you see security in the world where, from the workforce perspective, whether it's the coding aspect of it, because I guess a lot of people who are watching or listening to this would also be in enterprise that have all the best softwares for security in the world that they've paid for: firewalls, proxies, your edge server. I'm going to keep throwing acronyms after this, but in terms of where the focus should be, I like the approach you had for, hey, your IP challenge with the code. If I were to take a step back for people who are listening and thinking about, hey, what do I add to my security program for this year if I'm taking AI seriously? Is it my focus on MCP side, RAG side? What's your advice to other people who are trying to build a security program around AI today? And it could be Gen AI, or it could be ML plus Gen AI, because considering you've done both sides. You can take whichever direction you want.
I'll give you my answer with a bit of an example on what I have done a bit of here, right? When we started to adopt Gen AI, I had to take a step back and understand how are we really using the technology? What are the risks that come associated with that technology? And based on those risks, how can I mitigate those risks, right? And when we think about, to the earlier example around coding, it's okay, what solution am I using? What are the risks within that solution? If you're potentially contributing to open source versus just closed sources, probably the risks are a little bit different, right? If you're just consuming open source libraries as if nothing, I think you have potential issues in general, whether it's Gen AI or not, right? But I think the risks are still there. If you're going all Gen AI and just throwing security out the window, I don't think that's just the right approach. But I just go back as, okay, how do I look at myself? I need to enable the organization to do the best work they can on each of the functions that they have, right? And within that context, how can I understand the risks? How can I mitigate those risks as much as possible, but enabling them to be as effective, as efficient as they can be, as productive as they can be. So is it on MCP? Do you really need to focus on MCP, setting aside that it has its own set of issues around authorization, authentication, etc.? But okay, how do you bring it in-house? What's the purpose? Am I just going to use it with publicly available data? Is it private data? Is it legal data? Is it data that is under regulation if you're financial or healthcare? So from my point of view, it's really taking a step back and understanding, where am I trying to use it? What is the data? What would this ML be doing with this data? And then based on that, figuring out, okay, what are the right mitigations? Do you need to invest on the space? Yes. Do you need to get familiar with it? Yes. Do you need to have, quote unquote, AI experts dedicated? Maybe not, but everyone on your team should be familiar, and it shouldn't be a checkbox. So that's just a bit of my framework. I'm purposely not saying one core area, just because it could be used in so many different places, and you really need to raise the bar and focus on the core risk. That's my take.
And I guess to your point, it comes to the use case as well. If you're just looking to apply AI versus, hey, this is a use case, so you're able to at least dig down for what are, I guess, the gates or security gates that you want to put, or verification you want to put at that point in time as well. I was going to say, in terms of, I guess, the chat world, because I think most of the use cases today in most organizations, the Gen AI use cases are primarily around the whole chatbot space. And in terms of, I think when we were talking about this earlier, we spoke about the whole, in terms of approaching how this security around just specifically chatbot space versus like your LLM space versus, there's a lot more nuance to it. Is your approach similar in terms of just, hey, focus on access control? I think there's obviously a lot to said about deeper use cases, specific use cases, but I'm curious in terms of the way you approach security for all these new models coming out, or there's like a new model coming out every week, it feels, at least to me. There's a new MCP server being released every week. Everyone has a new MCP client, MCP server. Is the right way to approach, at least the way you approach it, without feeling overwhelmed about this, is what are some of the components that are important for you that people should consider in their program outside the hype of the new model came out, this came out, that came out? From a security perspective, what do you see are the core components of AI security that people should care about?
If I look in the context, if I go back in time, building upon the prior example, one of the core things that we did when we started to understand what the capabilities of Gen AI, how can we deploy that properly within the enterprise, right? How could our customer trust the tech was doing the right thing? We ended up looking at the risks associated with that, and then focusing on, okay, what are the mitigations that we have based on those core risks? So what we did is we ended up building an online assessment that uses LLMs to aim to identify malicious inputs, right? Based on whatever somebody's chatting there. Okay, let's just aim to identify it. They're trying to do something wrong, right? And by the way, some of them, something wrong could be something toxic, which shouldn't be appropriate for the workplace. Other stuff, maybe prompt leakage, right? Or a prompt injection. Are they trying to do that, right? We put that up front as part of our core work that we're doing as the input. In parallel, right, as that thing is running, obviously part of the core functionality trying to answer that question. If we identify there is anything malicious, we stop that right then and there. And then also we ended up checking once the final output is produced, you can argue it's simple, but if you look at the output, if you don't look at anything else, but you look at the input and you just look at the output, do those two make sense? So if you don't have the context, right, do those two make sense? And if they don't, then there's probably something funky that happened right then and there. And then we also had, going back to your other comment that you just made about there's new LLMs being produced on a weekly basis. What do you do there? How do you cannot keep up? We have an offline set of tests that we run aimed to identify what we call, for simplicity's sake, regression tests. Okay, we know that this will cause prompt injection. We know this will cause some toxic output, whether it's encoded, etc., whatever else. So that runs on a regular basis to aim to identify anything that could be done as we potentially ended up bringing a new LLM into production, just as a safeguard. So we have those two checks. When we started doing that work, there was no company that had those safeguards. It was, for me, we took a step back as a team as, okay, how do we enable this? How can we make this happen? And that's the approach that we ended up coming out. Today, there is startups that are building, or established companies that are building safeguards around that area.
Out of curiosity, what were some of the challenges you faced as you were building? Because considering there was no startups, probably building it in-house, no vibe coding that could help you at that point in time, unfortunately. So I'm curious about some of the challenges you faced that people could probably prepare for beforehand, I guess.
One of the main challenges that we had, so we already covered one of. One of them was the outputs could be different, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, fine. Setting that aside, the other bigger challenge that we ran into is performance. You cannot wait. If you're interacting with a chatbot, you expect a response right away. You don't want to wait 5 minutes. You don't want to make your coffee, thinking about other issues in high tech that we have run into. It's like, okay, I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee, come back for the output. You can't. So how can we make it performant enough? And from there, we ended up looking at a specific LLMs that were fine-tuned for security, right, that we could leverage, or ended up fine-tuning LLMs based on some of the outputs that we have, the inputs and outputs, et cetera, that we have, to ensure that they could identify that. But performance was, and I will argue it still is, a bit of a challenge. And the other one is, even though I think maybe I might end up eating my own words on this one, but I'll just say it as well, is even though I think I see a bit of less of quote unquote jailbreaks happening compared to about a year ago. A year ago, I felt that there was like new ones coming up very regularly. There's still cool new type of attacks that are happening, and some of them are very complicated. And that for me is like, how do we keep up? Fortunately, the bulk of this work, it's happening out in the open. So it's easy for us to pick that up, build those safeguards, and then give it back. I just remember the one that I was talking about. I can't remember who made the paper, but it was about the poem that it ended up spilling out.
Yeah, there's a universal jailbreak, I think, that just works for everything right now, and no one's patched it. So
yeah,
I think that's the case. Although to your point, I'm also not up to date on the jailbreak community.
Yeah.
But last I heard, there's a universal one, and it works, just keeps working everywhere.
And Ashish, one last thing that I will say on this as well: we don't expose within our product. We don't expose the LLMs directly to the end user, right? We use a variety of different LLMs to, or I should say, MLs, LLMs, etc., to produce a response back, right? Obviously, on the input, it's key to help. What is the person asking us to do. And then from there, it goes down. But anyway, so that's another core aspect as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to at least know what the moving parts of a chatbot would be from a security perspective. Also, I guess to your point, access control probably you continuously manage, I guess, confirming the right access is being maintained all the way up to the response coming out from the beginning of the request to the end of the response as well.
Yeah. So on that one, on access control, one of the key things that we did, we don't allow ML or LLMs, whatever, to make a determination. Who are you really, Ashish? Are you the admin or you're no? That's deterministic. On our system, it just comes from the source. So whatever you can do as Ashish, you will be able to get it back. But sometimes the problem is when you're doing on the search page, sometimes the problem has been that the way the system has been configured and how access has been put in place, it was more open than what it was really intended. So you ended up finding information that before you just didn't know where to look. Now, because it's indexed, etc., you ended up getting stuff that you're like, oops, yeah, why do I see that stuff? And it's not a problem with the LLM necessarily. It's just the reality that you already had access. You just didn't know where to look for.
Damian, where can people find you and connect with you to know a bit more about what you're doing and in the ML and AI space, man, before we wrap up the call?
Thank you for having me, Ajish. And Caleb, I don't have much else to ask. I enjoy the conversation. It has been fun.
For people to connect with you, Damian? That probably is the best place for it.
LinkedIn.
I'll put your LinkedIn stuff on the internet, on the internet, on the social notes, I guess. I'm going to put it on the internet. It's already on the internet.
On the World Wide Web is where I will post it.
Yeah, on the World Wide Web.
What is that, Caleb?
No, but I appreciate you jumping on the call, and thanks so much for this, man. Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. If you want to hear more episodes like these or watch them, you can definitely find them on our YouTube for AI Cybersecurity Podcast or also on our website, www.aicybersecuritypodcast.com. And if you are interested in cloud, which is also a sister podcast called Cloud Security Podcast, where on a weekly basis, we talk to cloud security practitioners, leaders who are trying to solve different clients' cloud security challenges at scale across the 3 most popular cloud provider. You can find more information about Cloud Security Podcast on www.cloudsecuritypodcast.tv. Thank you again for supporting us. See you next time. Peace.